Hi everyone, Jenny with On Fire Fit, and welcome to day 5 of week 5 of our battle plan. And today, listen to this. Man says, show me and I'll trust you. God says, trust me and I'll show you. Kind of the opposite of the way our human minds work, but that is so the truth. And I don't know if you do that already, but if you don't, this is all part of the process and what we are going through here. We're continuing with Daniel, and when Daniel was pulled out of the lion's den and the king was so overjoyed the fact that he didn't perish in that lion's den, it says in the Bible that Daniel was lifted from the den and that there was no wound found on him, and it was because he had trusted in his God. Would we be able to say the same? I hope that as we grow day by day, we will be able to say the same, that we trust in our God. Daniel was in a situation that he could not have gotten out of on his own, unless perhaps he had backed down from what he believed. He got thrown into the lion's den because he had continued his praying to God morning, noon, and night, 3 times a day, despite the fact that the king had ordered the kingdom, not to pray to anybody but him. Daniel refused. He could have backed down perhaps, and maybe he would have escaped going into the lion's den, but where would he be? And where would we be without this story? So his refusal to give up on his resolution that he would follow God, that he would continue in God's way, his resolution meant everything. He didn't toy with the idea of, maybe if I just say this, God will forgive me later. He followed through. He didn't toy with temptation, and he just trusted that God would deliver him. And this is something that we can take to heart, because our resolutions can get flaky at times when the pressure is on. But if we have decided that God's purpose for our lives is the overriding driving force for why it is important that we drive out this enemy, drive out this giant, if we hold on to that, we will have the power to hold on to our resolution. The Lord is the one that gives us the power. I never want to make it sound like it's us and we get to pat ourselves on the back because we did so well. But I feel that we oftentimes try to rely too much on God just to put supernatural power in us, but we don't have to do anything difficult. So we end up being lazy, and we end up relying on something that is actually not true to the Word of God. When they say faith without works is dead, faith is going to take you to heaven. When you actually put action behind it, now you start to change lives. You start to change your life. You might bring other people along with you into the glorious life. You might pull other people along into the abundant life. But if all we do is just live by faith and we don't have any action behind it, we'll get to heaven, but we will live in misery on earth. And that is not God's intention for us at all. Jesus came to give us an abundant life. And that is what we are grasping here. So as you go through the words that I've written here and really get this into your heart, I really hope that you will reflect back over the week. Take a look at everything, see what jumped out at you, what action steps you still need to take, what things do you need to trust God in, and where do you need to act, and what is it that will make you a doer and not a dyer, okay? So I will see you again next week for the final week of this, and I just hope that you go out and live your life on fire. Hi everyone, Jenny with On Fire Fit, and welcome to day 2 of week 5 of our battle plan. Words are meaningless without intent and follow through. I touched on this a little bit yesterday about how I could read a lot of things, but without the intention to make use of them and the actual follow through that includes action, They didn't really help me in the past. And now I have gotten to where I really take a hold of words and make them turn into action. And that's what I want for you as well. So we can apply that to our giant, whatever that might be. Some of you are along for the ride with me on the health wagon, and this is critical because there are a zillion diets out there filled with lots of words and instructions, but until you actually follow through on them, they won't do anything for you. And I think we all know that, but somehow we still lose sight of the fact that we actually have to put into action things. We sometimes think that there will come a day when it will just all click. And what we really have to do is what I said yesterday. We have to step out and grab a hold of the promises, the victory that God already gave us, and that is through our action. So as you look at this, yesterday we talked about our possibilities for why we have failed in the past. Today I want to talk a little bit more about solutions, and perhaps you've done this before or maybe you haven't, but when we look at the stories in the Bible of all the battles and the times that people won and the times that people lost, we find a lot of similarities. And some of the solutions that have really triggered people to start to rely on God and move into the victory that they already have, even though they might not be acting like it. One area is to drive sin out of your life altogether. As far as living on this earth, we know we're not going to be without sin. But if you have known sin in your life, something that you have not driven out altogether, it's what we would consider maybe like a habitual sin. That is something that we really need to rectify with God and put effort into banishing altogether. And one of the main reasons is because it separates us from God. When we are separated from God because we know we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, we kind of have that inkling of shame and guilt, maybe hiding things, whatever. It causes you to be disconnected. And when you're disconnected from your main power source, you're not going to walk in victory. You are going to be in a perpetual cycle of trying and failing. And so when you drive sin out of your life altogether, and you just really make the effort not to go into that anymore, you will start to feel like you have more of that connection. And it's really not like your action that does it. It's because Jesus already forgave you, but you are intentionally accepting that day after day and choosing not to walk in that old lifestyle anymore. So that would be one area. When we don't follow through on what we know to do, it absolutely sucks the victory out of your life. It sucks freedom out of your life. And I know it sounds like a very weird tension to live in, that when you are being really diligent and working through something that you know you're supposed to be doing, it doesn't sound like freedom. But it actually is, because the more you practice it, the more you feel like, oh, okay, I can do this. And you rely on God, of course, but He is in a partnership with us. He is promising to give us His power. He promises to give us self-control. But when we sit back and just expect Him to do all the work, we get to a point of being lazy. So we have to be intentional. We have to have a plan, anticipate the things that might come our way that are normally the things that throw us off track, and then make a plan and resolve that we are not going to fall back into that again. And the last one on this ties into that, is that knowing that God gave you a purpose and that your victory actually comes from living according to that purpose that He gave you. And I'm going to talk about that as it applies to my life a little bit more specifically, because I have had issues that all now I can see them kind of intertwining. I have a jaw issue. A lot of you know that I've had a stomach issue. I also have known for a long time that I am supposed to be writing, and this is part, what you are reading right now is part of what I feel like God has called me to do. And this is how it's intertwined for me. I have not had a weight issue per se in my life. However, I have had problems where sometimes I would have to go long periods of time without eating because my intestines were basically what has happened is they flipped around, and we don't know if it came from birth or if it came at some point in my life. I've always had digestive issues. But because of that, I would go long periods of time without eating because it triggered the whole thing to start moving, which caused pain. And because I was holding off eating for so long, in the evenings, I would eat a lot and then I would go lie down, and that kind of gave it room so that it could move around. But it also created this perpetual cycle of eating too much, which also is probably not good for your digestion. On top of that, I got to where we all know red wine is good for you, and to a certain extent it has, so many good benefits. But when you get to the point where you're drinking it every day, or you're having more than a glass, or whatever the case might be, I would do that at times in my life for my jaw because it was a natural relaxer, and it was either that or Advil. And I realized that it was also making me so that I didn't spend as much time eating correctly, spending time writing, staying focused on my goal. And so it all kind of intertwined, and there's excuses for all of it, of course, just like I'm sure you have excuses for all kinds of things that you have going on in your life. But when I got to the point where I said, my purpose is to love the Lord my God with all my mind, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my strength, and to love my neighbor as myself so that they can live a life on fire for God, loving God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. When I realize that's your purpose, these things like eating too much in the evening or drinking wine were working against that purpose. So now when I have moments where it's hard and I'm like, I really would rather just have a glass of wine than try to deal with this ache or whatever the case might be, I remind myself, what is your purpose? Do you want to work against what God has laid out for you to do? Or do you trust that by following through, by claiming that promise, by walking in action in the direction that He has put on your heart, that He will take you where you need to go? And a lot of this is something you really need to give thought to, because it doesn't really click until you give time to think about it. You need to know your why. You need to know why this is important to you. You need to know why this giant is worth defeating, because otherwise you will rush back and you'll retreat for another day, week, month, year, whatever, until you finally start to realize that I better face the giant again. So this is the time. This is the place. So let's get moving. Sorry, this video is a little longer, but I wanted to share my personal application on this. I hope that you go out today and every day and live your life on fire.